Now, I'm going to walk through my travels along the Brahmaputra as the as the title says, from Tibet to the Bay of Bengal. You will see that some of the photos may look a bit dated because I've done this journey over 20 odd years. It's not one journey, it's many journeys over a couple of decades. And this program is not meant to be a prelude to my book launch. I mean, there will be a book launch, and I hope my editor, who I've never met but only corresponded by email, is here. Sudeshna Chom Ghosh. Oh, hi, Sudeshna. Nice to see you in the person. Apart from so, uh, having dealt with texts and photos and eaten each other's heads for some time, we finally meet. Um, I wanted to start with a very simple story of childhood. When I used to come to Guwahati because I was born and brought up in Shillong, one of the things that I used to look forward to was not just a view of the river, but the sight of dolphins dancing in the river. I don't know if you've seen dolphins dance in the river, but if you haven't, it is something to truly behold. It is beautiful and majestic. So as a child, my image of the river was of dolphins in the river. And there's a story about dolphins, which I'll tell you later as we come towards the close of the thing, and a little role I had in protection of the dolphin in Assam. But let's start our journey by looking at the scale of this entity. We start in Tibet in the Chemayong Glacier, and it moves down. In fact, if you look at the map, we look at the map, we realize the greatest part of its journey is in Tibet. And it plunges briefly into Arunachal Pradesh, goes for about 600 kilometers to Assam, and then goes down into Bangladesh and joins the Podda, as the Ganga is known there, before joining the Meghna and flowing into the Bay of Bengal. Now, I'm an extremely privileged person to have traveled not all the length, but part of the Sangpo. Certainly, most of the Siang in Arunachal, the entire length of the Brahmaputra, and the entire length of the Jamuna. So, one river, three countries, many names. It is the Sangpo, the Yarlung Sangpo in Tibet, the Siang in Arunachal, the Brahmaputra, also known as the Lohitya, the Red River, in Assam, and then it changes names for the fourth time as the Jamuna in Bangladesh. So it's 3,000 plus kilometers, and my journeys have been obviously on the river, on dugouts and ferries and country boats, but also I've trekked along the side of the river in the mountains and the plateau, Tibetan plateau. Um, there are many stories of challenge and, shall we say, how would I put it? More than challenge, you've been tested really beyond your capacity to endure. And it can be a very, very extremely challenging river to travel on. I've been caught in storms and been, if not shipwrecked, I've been run aground. The the ships and vessels I've been on have sometimes run aground on shoals and sandbanks, and I've been swept out to sea. So it's been challenging, it's been adventurous, and it's been a great learning experience because what the river teaches us is humility. And I'll come to that at the end of the stage if we perhaps talk about in the Q&A about the Chinese dam. When we arrived in Tibet many years ago, and the backbone of this book, the backbone of this presentation is drawn from a film that Jahana Borua and I made on the river. And we started in Tibet, or rather, the film starts in Tibet. It was the last place we got permission to visit. And when we arrived, we saw a flood. Now, when you think of Tibet, do you think of a flood? No. So there are things that we constantly learn. And it's in Tibet that the river, of course, picks up power, speed, and all those characteristics which mark it downstream. But you also see the first of the islands, which you see dotting the riverscape in Assam. And the scale, nothing prepares you for the scale of Tibet. It is astonishing. I mean, I stood at one point, and on your left, you see mountains, snow-clad, two kinds of mountains, snow-clad and something that looks like a great dusty hill. And you're standing on a road that is going like an arrow to the horizon without deviation. And on your right are barley fields, buckwheat, and the yellow of mustard, and then the river. So you have all kinds of vegetation. The things that we think about Tibet, a place like Tibet, perhaps of a dry, barren landscape, is completely untrue because there are many places which are rich in vegetation and, of course, in culture. And I wanted to show you this because this is a pretty spectacular vista of the mountain. No, it's not Kailash. It is just one of the mountains that we were passing as we were traveling. But I thought it gives us a sense of proportion and scale, just as this did. I mean, I was traveling along the river, the Sangpo, and it's narrow there, but it's fast. And you can see how it has carved its way over millennia through the rock and the stone. And it moves at such speed, one can imagine only how it will fall down the hills, the mountains, to enter Arunachal Pradesh. And you stand at the bottom of that precipice, right next to the stream, which becomes the great river. And you think of really how small we all are. There's a first, as I said, it teaches us humility about who we are and not what we achieve. Technology is very interesting along the river. So this is what's called a yak skin boat. We are familiar with yaks, of course. It's made from the hide of about 7 or 8 animals. It can accommodate about 15 people. There are reference to this in the journals of the British adventurer who was sent in the latter part of the 18th century by Warren Hastings, George Bogle, young man in his 20s, about crossing the river in this contraption, in this canoe, and finding that it had cattle and other livestock in it apart from people. So this is a very light boat because the river is very swift, and this man can maneuver it very easily through these currents and take large and small groups of people and animals. When we were in Tibet, we hit a flood. Now, as I said, the first thing we saw when we came out, when we were driving to Lhasa, was a flood. And this is you're driving through a flood. Now, I've driven through floods in Assam and other places, but this was pretty intense. For the description of the experience, read the book when it's out. I won't go further than that, but I'll only say that our driver started muttering Tibetan, started muttering prayers. Our guide started muttering prayers, and the driver started counting beads. So he was driving, but so I said, okay, this is very serious. And the water was really up, almost to the windscreen. We came across, as we traveled in Tibet, because it was a time also of rain and flood, we came across this village called Zangri. Zangri is very famous for its millet and buckwheat production. Suddenly they found that we had come the previous day, and found it was perfect for filming. People are going about the work, the fields were ripe, getting ripened for harvest. The next day we went, everything was underwater, and the entire village came out to salvage the crop. So this is during the latter part of the day, when they had finished their rescue mission of their crop, and they were not happy at all. And one thing that Chinese occupation of nearly 75 years has failed to do is destroy the belief of the Tibetans in their own faith, in Buddhism, and in themselves, truly. And this is quite a common sight. Nowadays, if you go to the Potala Palace, there is a great courtyard in front of it, surrounded by, of course, Chinese officers. But if you go to another monastery called the Jokhang used to be a beautiful center of what do you get? You get all sorts of herbs. The air is full of the smell of herbs, mountain herbs, crushed in the raw state, etc. Today, you can't access that square, the herbs on the square, because they've been just moved to the side. The people are not allowed to keep their wares in front of the monastery, and there is acute surveillance there. We travel across the mountains, the Tibetan plateau, and this is in Arunachal Pradesh, where the river begins to develop characteristics that you see downstream, the braided river, the many channels that appear flowing from different directions, creating islands, and seemingly almost uncontrolled, shall we say. This is taken from a place called Hawa Camp. There's a story also behind that. Hawa Camp is obviously a place where there is a paramilitary presence, and you'll see a lot of that across Arunachal for obvious reasons. But the wind is so strong is that you really have to bend to walk up the hill. And everything there, apart from people, is bent. The trees are bent, the bushes are bent, because it's a continuous flow of wind that surges through the valley from the high Himalayas, from the plateau, and goes down into the plains. So it's not just the river and the waters which flow; it is also the wind that also has an impact on the flow of the river. Um, Throughout our travels, we came in contact with obviously many cultures, and Buddhism is a very strong faith in parts of Arunachal Pradesh. So uh, this is in a place called Namsai. Namsai is the home of the Thai Khamti people, one of the many communities that live in the place we call the Northeast. About 220 communities, at least, and counting in the region. But in Arunachal, the Khamtis are extremely influential, extremely artistic, Buddhist, of course, and they're very small as a population. I think the total population is several thousand. But they're extremely wealthy because they are a community that moved from a place in Myanmar, Burma, called Putao, migrated in the 19th century. And actually, they migrated earlier, but they began in the 19th century to become great foresters and loggers. And they used elephants to move these logs, move the river, use the river to float them downstream. And logging was a very, and elephant catching was a very important part of their work and life. And you will find that in Namsai, in a place called Chokham, you will find still people who speak the original Khamti language. And the script is one of the few scripts of the region, like Manipuri has one script, the original Manipuri script, Assamese, Khamti, and a couple of others. They have their own original scripts. So this is among the handful of communities with their script. This is further down in the valley. You come across another community called the Idu Mishmis, and I would suggest look. You would, if you look at them, you will see this great silver earrings that the man is wearing, and the bandolier is of very old coins, apart from the necklace. And the Idumishmis are also uh, a community that has lived in these areas for since time immemorial. And in Arunachal Pradesh, the official language is English. But many people, an older generation, perhaps my generation and older, used to speak what was called Nephamis, which is a mix of Assamese and the local dialect. But today, most people prefer to speak in Hindi. And you will find that as you travel to the region, especially to Arunachal Pradesh, the number of Hindi speakers has also gone up. This is an old picture of what Parshuram Kund looks like. It's important to have these images of what existed in a very raw state. Today, this area is built up. Parshuram Kund, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Parshuram, who, on the instructions of his father, the sage killed his mother. So the curse of matricides, as a result, the axe stuck to his hand, and he went everywhere seeking forgiveness and to literally to wash that sin away. He came to this place, this kund, and he took a dip, and the story goes that the axe fell from his hand, and he was so inspired that he, with a great blow of his axe, he cleaved a way for the river to flow into the plains. That's the story. Um, Another very interesting story is that there's a bridge now near here which crosses the Roet. But that bridge took many years to build, not because there were a lack of efforts or lack of funds, but every time they would build a span, there would be a great rush of water, unexpected, and demolish what had been built. So it took a long time. I mean, construction in the region does take long. And as you travel further down into Assam, that's in Arunachal, into Assam, you find remnants, very visible remnants of the past by the river. The river is essentially the leitmotif for almost everything that goes on. It divides the region from India, and between it's like India and Southeast Asia, or it's the point at which, at one point many years ago, Islam ended, the movement of Islam ended, and it's also the one thing that flows right through the entire geography of the north, from point one to point. So it divides, but it also links and unites. And this is uh, from the Ahom kingdom, the great Ahom kingdom, which lasted 600 years from 1226 to 1826, and ruled much of Assam and its surrounding areas, fought the Mughals, defeated them, and is now deeply, still deeply respected and honored for their role in history. But the Ahoms made very good use of the river in warfare. And that's how I think many of us perhaps know of it. I mean, those in Assam know of it perhaps a bit more. Because in the 17th century, there was a great battle between the forces of Aurangzeb and the forces of the Ahom kings. And there was an Ahom general called Lachit Barphukan, who led his army to war, or his navy to war. And they had smaller boats than the Mughals, but they used their boats in a very skillful manner, and they defeated the Mughal navy and drove them away. So that is regarded as one of the great battles of medieval India. Along the river, as we keep moving, we keep journeying, the tea plantations appear, commerce, brought in by the British. The British didn't discover tea, they only exploited it. So, tea was, there was a community in Arunachal Pradesh called the Singhpos who were using tea. And in the 19th century, the Bruce brothers had heard of this. So they went and had parleys, and they were able to bring some tea, and finally they brought in Chinese cultivators, tea planters, but later they brought in labor from Chotanagpur and central India. Why was that? Because they needed cheap labor to work the plantations and to clear the land. Now, this is one of the things that is often not talked about not enough is talked about it, because the exploitation of labor by the British at that time led to the deaths of thousands of people, because these people were brought from the plateau, the Chotanagpur plateau and those areas, into the Assam plains. And they were brought by ship. There was no way you could bring them by land. So they were brought by ship, and many people died on the journey of dysentery, diarrhea, and so on. And to this day, the tea, they call the tea tribes because they are Adivasis, Orang, Santals, and so on, who have settled in Assam over the past 150, 170 years and more. Their language is mixed with Assamese at times, but in their songs, they still sing about not just missing home, they talk about how they were cheated and how they were brought by artifice and other means, force, to this land. You promised us a lot, but here we are. You know. But the tea garden community, and they speak a language, the language is called Shadri, is one of the single largest communities in the entire Northeast. In between, you have these smaller rivers and rivulets which are flanked by forests, and this is inside a national park called the Dibru Soikho National Park. This is not very far from Dibrugarh in Tinsukia. And in it, another, shall we say, reminder and remnant of the war, but you'll see them in the wild, are feral horses. These are, so if you go to the Dibru Soikho National Park, one of the species of animals that you will see there are the feral horses. These were pack ponies, World War II pack ponies, who at the end of the war, there was no use for them. So what to do? So it was either a question of just letting them go, or, they were placed here and they became feral. There's a large population of these wild horses now in Dibru Soikho. They suffer every year from the floods. And, a number of them are used on islands and in villages as pack ponies still. They've been taken away from the park, or they've strayed. So they're caught by people and used such. Among the livelihoods of people there on the islands, on the mainland, is rearing of pigs and marketing. You have poultry, but you have pigs, and this is quite a lucrative. If not lucrative, it helps people run their livelihoods in a reasonable way. It helps them survive the difficult times, because the main community of the main communities in the Assam Valley certainly are essentially agrarian, and theirs is based. Their agrarian economy is based on self-sufficiency. It's not market-driven. But market-driven is we go to communities that live further down the river. So this is one way in which they are managing and surviving. And all the time, we must remember this, all the time there are communities that live on the islands, and I'll explain that in a bit, have constantly to deal with the elements. It's not just the river, but it is erosion. It's not just flooding, it is erosion. Erosion is one of the biggest challenges facing Assam and today. So I talked earlier about the what do you call it, the islands which were first appearing in Tibet, the first photograph. But nowadays, today in Assam, there's something like 2,500 islands, okay, on which about 8% of Assam's population lives. Even I didn't know this until I started working on the film and studying the issue and traveling on the river. And there are all communities. They're tribal, they're non-tribal, they're Hindu, they're Muslim, they're all communities. If you look at this photo closely, if you look on the upper deck, can you see motorcycles? Yeah. So these are both ferries for people as well as transport goods and vehicles, and their place in some areas is being taken over by the large ferries, which are steel and so on, and those run largely on specific routes. But in many parts of Assam, you still have smaller boats that carry people from one point to another point where there are no bridges. And there aren't too many bridges. Now, this is a place called Kundil Ghat. And all these, why I'm showing this photograph is, some of these photographs, is that it's important to remember what was, because what is happening now is some of these places, there are bridges which are spanning. So you don't have this kind of formation. But even at that time, you have this rather unique combination, literally a combination. Two of these country boats would be tied together. So you have a truck coming on board, and then maybe a cattle or a cow or two as well, and it will be driven across the river. So much has changed. Much has changed in these past years, but it's important to know what we had to deal with. I mean, yesterday I went to see a ship, so in which we are building in Guwahati. It's a hospital ship. It's 4 deck. It's a beauty. Sorry to use a Trumpian phrase, but how do you get there? You have to put planks down. So because there was a flood, so I was about to walk to the boat and then get onto it. We said we'll put planks down. So you walk on planks to get to the boat, which is then pulled to the hospital ship. And then it's wonderful. It's 4 decks. It's got operating theater. We hope the government will commission it in a few months. But so somebody wrote to me saying that this is a rather primitive way to go. That we are living still in some primitive times, Everything is not modern. Anyway, that's an aside. If you look at, this is in Dibrugarh. So you move down to Dibrugarh, where there are now new bridges at the crossing the river, and there is this embankment. If you can see it, there is this paved thing. This is the embankment that protects Dibrugarh from the river, because I don't know if any of you have been to Dibrugarh or have traveled in that area. At one time in the floods, the water will rise to a point where the water level is higher than that of the city. So if the embankment breaks, the city goes. So it's very important that this embankment be kept protected and strong. Now, that truck is actually a kind of a dumper. It's carrying sand which has been illegally dug from the side of the river and from a wetland next to it. And this is happening constant. This was happening constantly. And it's a challenge across a place, a state in Assam where there's much demand for construction, whether it's roads, bridges, houses. There is an aspirational generation. There are people who want many things. And among the things that you need to get anything that you want is sand. You just look around you. Everything here, you need sand to build a place like this. You need sand for the roads outside. So extraction across, not just in one place, but across the state and in many other states of India is becoming a major problem, a major challenge for the lives of rivers. But I thought I'll show you what the river feels like in flood. Um, and you can go for several hours on this. I mean, in the winter, it shrinks to perhaps one fourth of its size, and there'll be several challenge. But in the monsoon, as now, it will be full, and it can be challenging to travel on it because you can be buffeted by winds and waves. But it is a beautiful way to travel. I can tell you that. And it is a constant reminder of how much natural beauty there is around us and how little time we take to see it and absorb it. Side by side, there's this other work going on. So I talked about the embankments, I talked about the sand extraction. So here we are. This is the embankment being expanded. And work when I went a couple of years ago, work was uh, going continuously from early morning to late in the evening on trying to shore up the embankments and making sure that they were strong enough with geothermal bags and sandbags and all that. So you have a constant flow of people and vehicles carrying sand here and there. Mm, but it is not always effective. But the views are pretty spectacular. Assam during the monsoons and just after is extremely green. It's an extremely fertile area. And side by side, you have skills which are which have been around for hundreds of years. This man is working on the brassware, uh, which is in a place called Hartyabari, not far from Guwahati. And some of the work that they do is exported for centuries, is being exported to Bhutan. So this is one of the very unique uh, skills and works that are done here, but in very basic conditions. And as you go towards further down the river, as you go, you will find these groups of men, essentially men who are working at great pace on bamboo, splitting, shaving, cutting, and weaving mats of them, weaving fences of them, which are then carried further downstream or sent elsewhere. So this is a very basic uh, production unit, shall we say, on the banks of the river. The river seized on. Now we're in Bangladesh. So somebody was moving house, and I thought this is a rather interesting image. Uh, Wherever you go in on the river, there are prayers to it, to the river gods and to other gods. In Tibet, many of the monasteries are located by streams and rivers, not just the Sangpo. And in Bangladesh, this is a fairly common phenomenon to see somebody heeding the call to prayer on a boat. Ladies will recognize this. Is the jam? I think it's the jamdhani. So it's very interesting. In Bangladesh, the weavers are Hindu. All of the weavers are Hindu, and they roll these and many others out for us to see and photograph, and talk to us about life and how challenging it was. I'm using the word challenging many times in my conversation, but I think you'll understand what this is. But the challenge not because of the politics of the situation, but also because it's sometimes difficult to get the kind of threads that they need. So some are migrating to Calcutta and so on to basically set up another unit there. It's not just for other reasons, religious reasons, otherwise, but also for economic. As we sailed down the river, we were able to travel by boat in Bangladesh, apart from road. This was on the island of Hatia, which is just if you look at a map of of Bangladesh, there is this great island which is at the mouth of what's called the mouth of the Ganges. I think that should be called the mouth of the Brahmaputra, because if you see the flow of the rivers, it is the Brahmaputra which is the larger river. But anyway, be that as it may, I don't want to get into an argument on that. But these ships were tossed inland about 1.5 kilometers inland during a storm. When we went and saw them, they were sitting there for about 7 or 8 months. So when I asked, well, what's going to happen? So the crew said, well, if a storm comes and the water rises, then we will go. Otherwise, what can we do? We cannot go anywhere. Can't be pulled out. This is a split image. The two are not necessarily connected to each other. But this is, of course, the most favorite fish of Bangladesh, Ilish. And in Bangladesh, the river is traversed on great ferries. These Norwegian-built ferries, which can carry hundreds of people and many buses and trucks. So when you travel long distances, this is a good thing to do. As I said, the river can be extremely relaxing to be with, be on and be with. It's not just this entity that is challenging and driving you and pushing you into all sorts of difficult situations. You can also relax. For anybody who's got a back problem, I'll recommend one thing. Sit on a country boat, lean your back against the pole, and you'll get a terrific massage. It's one of the few things that are not one of the many things that are not known about country boats. But others love this image of people just relaxing. Um, Flood time. People manage on. I've talked about floods in Tibet and so on, and I haven't dwelt on them too much here because it's visual all the time. Now we're seeing them what's happening in Punjab and other places. But they move. Is look at the top of the photo. On those are banana stems, and here this family is coming to an island for moving from their island to another island for better just to survive because their place was flooded out. Um, before I conclude, I just wanted to share some because this is not just my own journeys; it's also my own discovery, my own learnings, and I wanted to share that with you. So many years ago, I was traveling, obviously on a ferry to the island called Majuli. Now, many of you have heard of Majuli. Some of you have visited Majuli. It's this greatest river island in the heart of the river, and it is famous for what are called the satras or the monasteries, which were set up by this great Vaishnavite reformer in the 15th and 16th century, uh, Srimanta Shankar Dev, the saint. They also largest population of Majuli are the Mishing people, who are a majority. Uh, So I was traveling with Jahnu Bora, the filmmaker. We were making this film on the Brahmaputra, and we were traveling on this ferry. And on the ferry, we got the news that a young woman had died in childbirth on that very ferry, but coming on the other side. So the story was tragic and interesting. I mean, as a journalist, I was troubled by it and also interested, fascinated. It was essentially that this young woman had a difficult pregnancy and was trying to come with her family from Majuli to the mainland because there are no hospitals there, and to come to the mainland for admission to a hospital for the delivery. They missed the ferry. There were two ferries, only one in the morning, one in the evening. They missed the evening ferry, so they had to spend the night by the river, um, cold, wet, and damp, And the river at night, I would urge all of you to go by a large river and stand by it at night for half an hour to an hour. It is alive. It is roaring. It is moving. And so they spent the night there. They caught the morning ferry, but she didn't make it. So I heard this story and I said to myself, but in Assam, women are, I was living under this illusion that women were very equal. They had pride of place, etc. There are no dowry debts, etc. We grew up on this and we know this. But then I did some checking. Journalists, you have to check facts, no? Unlike nowadays. So I checked. We found that, to my absolute horror, I found that Assam had the worst maternal mortality ratio in India, which means that there's more chance of a young woman of any age, dying in childbirth than from any other cause, especially in rural Assam. The second thing was the point that I had made earlier, the 2,500 islands I didn't know, on which lakhs and lakhs of about 2.2 million people live, 22 lakh people, 8% of the population at that time. So, how do we bridge this gap? Because that's the point at which the journalist took a back step and the health activist or the activist, came in. So I asked myself a question. I mean, we have to do something about it. But what does a hack know? Okay, my brother's a doctor, my father was a doctor, my grandfather was a doctor, but I'm not a doctor. I know nothing about health, the science of health. So then I was traveling on the river and I kept talking to people. That's the other thing is that not talk, but listen. So if one listens to people, one gets a lot of information and understands issues better. So the thing that is like a eureka moment in a conversation with a woman panchayat leader, she said boats. I mean, you can't build bridges and create roads everywhere. Here, boats are the only way you can get around. So then I thought, okay, so boats will carry health, can carry health, not ad hoc on a flood, but on a sustained manner. So we designed and built a boat. We designed the boat, then we won an award from the World Bank, a very small award, which helped us build the first boat in Dibrugarh. And I don't think that's the particular one, but it's one of the ones we built later. That's in Sonitpur. So Dibrugarh, and we started it, one boat. Today there are 15 boats, and there are working in 15 districts, a team of 250 with doctors, nurses, and it's got a lab on board. These have labs on board and pharmacies. So earlier, there was no access to any of these services. Now people have access, and the maternal mortality ratio in Assam has gone down from 492 in 2000. Today, it is about 125. So that, to me, was an incredible, assertion of what could happen if an idea takes wing or flows in the stream. So we have these boat clinics where people are treated on a regular basis. And the river lends itself to many uses. The river, I've always said the river is our ally, because I didn't want to come here and just make a presentation about how beautiful the river is or how challenging it is or how terrific people are. There are challenges, yes, but there are things that can be done if we view the river as an ally, not as a Ganashatru, not as an entity that has to be controlled. You have to listen to what people say and to understand how the river can, in a way, literally work with us. And the boat clinics are an example of that. And I thought I'll close with a short video, and then I'll be able to take.
Imagine living on an island in the middle of a vast river. No roads in, no bridges out. An endless stretch of water, separating you from the world beyond. And imagine if somebody falls ill. This is a journey through Assam, amid the rivers, with one question. How do some of the remotest parts of India receive medical care? Our search for an answer starts from the banks of a small industrial town in northern Assam called Tinsukia. And this boat? Well, on a usual day, it's meant for tourists. But today, it's much more than that. It's a crew on a task. Go island to provide healthcare. Doctors, nurses, lab technicians, a clinic on the water set to depart. Over the next 2 days, my colleague Bimal and I are going to be traveling with this boat crew to try and understand the state of medical care in the islands. We're heading to a secluded village deep in the forest, nestled in the middle of the Siang River, known as Laika Pamua. This island is just one amongst hundreds spread across the Brahmaputra River. These islands are home to nearly 2.5 million people, around 1/10 of Assam's population. As we make our way through the narrow tributaries, we make a pit stop. There's a conversation going on the crew that whether these children here are vaccinated or not, and I don't think the kids like it very much. As more patients come in, the crew set up a small desk with the doctor and the pharmacist. They've actually stopped the boat slightly ahead, and they've done it for two reasons. One is that they wanted to look out for the patients here who are very far from the camp that they'll be setting up for. And so it's been exclusively set up for them, and there are people coming here. There's a mother who came with a 1.5-year-old child who had a fever, and they're being looked after right now. They're being given medicines. The medicines are in the boat. The second reason why we stopped is because the boats had to be changed.
जहाँ पर कैंप हमारा कैंप साइड होता है उसमें जाने के लिए हमारा वो जो वाटर लेवल है वाटर लेवल इज वेरी लो इसलिए हम ये बड़ा वाला ये शिप्स नहीं जाता है वो कैंप साइड में नहीं जाता है
क्योंकि पानी शैलो है वहाँ पे
पानी कम होता है इसलिए नहीं जाता है इसलिए हम ये फाइटर बोट लेकर हम वहाँ चला जाता है
Fighter boat. You heard that right. Imagine a big boat. Make it smaller, and smaller even. Add a roof with tarpaulin and straw. Voila. This can navigate on shallower water. We then set off. But eventually the crew looked to stop again. There is a distress signal that they have received. So they've made another stop at one of the nearby islands, and they've done it because there is a patient here who needs a drip, essentially a saline water drip. And they've done that for this patient, and they've already off-boarded the doctor and the nurses, and they're just going up their house, and so are we. She must be 70 or 80 years old, 75 or 80 years old is what they're saying. She's in quite a condition. Her name is Bir Soni Tara, and at her age, medical care becomes crucial. But how does that crucial medical care happen, if at all?
মানে কাপিল কে বলা মান জয় জসাং কলো অকুবিরা রাখ বহি বসাং কলো অকুবিরা রং লাগাং হাই পয়সা হাই না জগ অকুবিরা গাম নাং লগ লাই কাজে গানো কাপিরা বন কি নাই বং ইয়া পুঙা হাম পাইলানা গবপা গবলা বারো বুলক পাইতারো গবপা আইবং গুইজান অকয়লপ মেডিকেল অলপ অকয় তিনচুকিয়া অকয় চিভিল অলপ গবপা আইবো না রকনো
Remember Tinsukia? That's the town where our journey began. It had taken us 3 hours to get to this island. In case of an emergency, Bir Soni Tara's family would have to make a long and daunting journey. Back on the waters, we make our way to Laika Pamua, this small forest village with a population of over 3,000 people. A boat clinic like this makes only 2 rounds in a month to an island like Laika Pamua. So this becomes quite an opportunity. Immunizations for children and health checkups for expecting mothers. But many islanders told us that twice-a-month service was not enough. And in case of an emergency, they struggle to get medical care. 26-year-old Sushmita Pegu is one of them, an expecting mother who has traveled a kilometer to reach this camp.
Arus malang lam te hati kolom motor dan noloy dula kinduwe. Bonai bi kumolo bonai bi pai ko bona dik tani okhubida ta nei olo. Ai po olop ko kolo okhubida ra. Bagam pi emergency serious na kara ga man lam tel sipang tani.
This was something we came across often in our journey. This was what a mother on another island told us.
Kinam gas ko kana ngulti chibiang tarai Kulu ka dum kara ko kana
The boat clinics in Assam started in 2005 by a non-governmental organization called the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research. In the years that followed, the government began to invest in the program via the National Health Mission that aims to address the medical needs of underserved rural areas. We took the concerns of the islanders to the National Health Mission.
These riverine islands are shifting islands. Today's shape will not be there tomorrow. Today's spread will not be there for tomorrow. The bigger stars, we have permanent presence in the form of subcenters. However, large-scale hospitals and to provide electricity for such large-scale operations is a big challenge.
Officials didn't specify if they were planning to increase the frequency of the boat clinic service to address the concerns of the islanders. The challenge of access to islands is also why the boat clinics began in the first place.
Many years ago, I was traveling on the river, and I was going in a ferry actually from one side of the river to this great island in the heart of the river called Majuli. Then I found to my horror that this young woman, then in her teens, had been carried from a village after a difficult pregnancy to catch a ferry to the mainland where there was a hospital, but she didn't make it in time. So there were two deaths in a way, not just the mother, but also mother and unborn child. And that really was the start of the journey. And I said to myself that there needs to be a way of closing this gap, of bridging this gap. And what perhaps better way than by boat?
It's been nearly 2 decades since Hazarika's fateful journey through the rivers. Over the years, several boat clinics came up across the Brahmaputra, but life on these boats can be quite challenging.
এবাৰ মানে এনেকুৱা হৈছিলে সেই জংঘলখিনিত মানে আমি এটা সাইডৰ পৰা আহি আছো বটলৈকে তাৰছত এই ফ্ৰন্ট সাইডৰ পৰা মানে এজাক হাতী আহি আছিল তেতিয়া আমি টিমটো আমি জংঘলত সোমাই দিলো এই জংঘলত সোমাই কিনে ৰাতি মানে 8টা লৈকে আমি জংঘলত মানে ঘূৰি থাকিব লগা হৈছে ৰাস্তা বিচাৰি পোৱা নাছিল লাষ্টত মানে বটৰ পৰা আমাৰ দুজন মান ষ্টাফ গৈছে গৈ কিনে মানে আৰু তেতিয়া আৰু এজনে আমাৰ লগত এনএম আছিল তেতিয়া এনেকুৱা তাই হৈ গৈছে ৰাতি মানে গটে 3 মান্থ প্ৰেগনেন্ট আছিল তেতিয়া তাই গটে ৰাতি মানে পেটৰ বিহত মানে শুব পৰা নাছিল কিছুমান বহুত এনেকুৱা মানে সিচুৱেচন পাৰ কৰিছো আৰু
In the midst of these waters, you're forced to think, what does the future hold? In the long wait for accessible medical care, thousands of lives hang in the balance. The questions remain. Where do you go when an emergency happens? How fast do you get there? Are these boats enough?
Actually, that's supposed to be the close, but I just wanted to share 2 or 3 things before we wrap up. One is, you may have noticed that both in the last documentary and in previous photos, the photos of houses on stilts. This is in Assam. This is designed in Upper Assam by the Mishing community. And these were to deal with floods as well as in the older days with issues of wild animals. But they are ecologically resilient. They're truly green, eco-friendly architecture. And they take need very little care. It's in a warm climate, it's extremely airy, so the air keeps rolling through. So the traditional technology has very key users in people's lives. There's another one, because we've been talking about boats and boat journeys. There are different boats for different purposes. So of course you have a mal boat for goods and all that, but you also have different sizes and shapes of boats which are shaped to carry X number of people. Of course, often they're overloaded, but the design depends on the way where the river is located, which part of the river you're traveling in. So what I mean to say is that if you go to Upper Assam, the engines are more powerful because the ships, the vessels are actually climbing a hill. When you go up, when you're going up and the going is slow, you look back, you can actually see the slope. They are going up a hill. And that is always important for us to remember that, there is great technologies. There are lots of plans to develop all sorts of ports and make this a very visible business navigable channel. But we need to understand first what the geography and history of the river is. The last point I wanted to share with you is a very personal a story which I find always very moving, but also very inspiring. Some years ago, we came across a story of a boat clinic which is returning from a trip. They go out sometimes for 2-3 days, others do day trips. So this one was coming back on the second day, and they saw this couple on literally a spit of an island, a tiny place, waving to them. So it was getting evening, and there are no navigation. Remember, there are no navigation, modern navigation facilities on these boats. You navigate by the light and by the expertise, the expert eye of the pilot who can see the current, actually, the depth, and so on. So they saw this, they stopped the boat, and they found a young child, about 7 or 8 years old, who was turning blue because she couldn't breathe properly. She had a very acute breathing problem. And they had the right medicines, and they were able to give it to her, an injection, and they left several days medicine. And the girl improved. Now, the interesting thing was that the doctor asked the question like a good journalist should. You seem to be waiting for us. How did you know that we would come this way? So, and this is, again, there's a certain quality to this answer which underlines a certain point. The man said, you go that the spit of land was on where the river breaks and goes in 2 different channels. If you go this way, you come back in 2 days. If you go this way, you come back in 3. We've been seeing you for years. But this time you went up this way. The child got unwell yesterday. We knew you'd be coming back today. So the quality of trust. This is something we learn. That when a stranger puts his life, the life of a child, in the hands of another person, that is trust. And that's the quality that makes things work. That's one big learning from this time. And there can never be enough. There is the BBC journalist, like a journalist should ask the question, is it enough? It's never enough. We always have to do more. And that's why we're here. We must do more, as much as we can and as often as we can, and as for as long as we can. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for the presentation. I am from Guwahati, but grew up in Upper Assam, so it was pretty nostalgic for me. My question is regarding the new dam built by China, or they are going to build a dam over the Brahmaputra. The government of Assam has brushed off any concerns regarding them controlling the flow of the river. But in your personal opinion, what do you think about it? Do we potentially face any grave concerns in the future? Thank you.
I think we're going to face considerable challenges, which I think are partly unexpected, because the Chinese, unlike other countries, actually do what they say they're going to do. So this is a dam that is supposed to be finished by 2030 or so, 30, 33. They say that it will not affect flows downstream, which means that they're not building a reservoir because it's very difficult to build a reservoir in those areas. But the thing is that you don't know what the impact will be. This is to generate power, right? So one of the first principles, there must be many engineers here. One of the first principles of hydroelectricity, if you generate power, the water has to be clean. You can't have grain and rocks and all sorts of debris coming into the turbine room. It'll just be destroyed. So you're basically dealing with a situation where the water will be completely sterile, turned sterile, because the soil element will be kept out, or at least sediment. It may pick up more sediment as it is released, but that is one impact that I see, because water, when it's cleaned, and India is trying to build more dams on its side, whether it's a Subansiri or whatever, I don't know how that helps us, because water, when it's clean, it will come through and just cut through the soft soil in the valley like a knife through butter. And that's one. And it will not have any chemical, any nutrients, which will help farmers, fish. There are many species, not just humans, who live in these systems, the dolphins. So I don't see how this thing can be dismissed, because we need to understand the long-term consequences, not just the short-term consequences. You may get the water, what kind of water it is a different thing. So that's as much as I can say. I don't know enough. Yeah.
Hi, Professor. Hi. So I had 3 questions. Can you see me? Oh, okay. So I'll just ask one question. You did mention, we did speak about the villages that are on the islands. I wanted to ask, do they have any sort of local self-governments or agencies that support them in some form, or governments that they can elect, and so on and so forth? We know that the union and the state are a little far away from these islands, but village panchayats, or what we've given them through 73rd Amendment, do they have some power? Do they take any effort? Or are these not even counted as villages with some level of empowerment?
Some are counted as villages, some are not. I think that the panchayats in a large number of these areas, you have ward members, you have what are called the local health and sanitation committees. So, but they're not very active. Panchayats get active when there is action, shall we say, and when there are projects to be rolled out and so on. Many of the panchayat members have houses in town, and they go and visit their constituents, their homes, only once in a while. So these are, as Lakshmanan, the National Health Mission chap, said, these are temporary creations, because the river one day will cover an island or part of it. It will emerge somewhere else. So one of the things that we've noticed, I once brought this doesn't answer your question, but it's to tell you the complexity of the situation. I once brought a psychiatrist friend of mine to just observe some of these camps. And I said, just observe, tell me what you think. He said, every person who comes has got a PTSD problem, post-traumatic stress. I said, and why do you think that is? He said, because they are losing their homes 2 to 3 times in a year. The stress of uncertainty, of not knowing how long you will be in a place. So that is a real challenge. There's one here who's been holding it.
Good evening. That was really a lovely presentation. I have a small question regarding a tribe called Pegu tribe in Assam. Would you be able to tell me a little bit about
them? The Pegus are a part of the Mishing tribe.
Sorry?
The Pegus are a part of the Mishing tribe. That's a name of a person from the Mishing community.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I think a lot of the places that you visited, like Tibet, Assam, Arunachal, these have been politicized in a lot of ways by people in China, politicians in China or in India. And you mentioned that one of the things that you have to do as a journalist is be able to tell truth from fiction. And so, from your journeys, what have you seen on the ground that is different from a lot of the political narratives that we hear?
First of all, the attention span of most people, as far as news is concerned, is less than 3 minutes. So they switch channels or they switch whatever they're watching on their thing immediately. So I don't know how much people are seriously actually seeing what is going on, because there's a lot of other stuff that's going on that is not in the papers, no, or in the media. For instance, let's just take what you've just seen today, the last part of the presentation. How many of you knew that this is happening? This happens. Whether there's a flood, whether there's a riot, we worked during the worst times of Ulfa. There was a village where we had just left. 8 people were lined up and shot. We went back to that village after some time. So there are many things that happen on the ground which are not reflected in the new narratives that are being created and driven, especially media narratives. And I would still say that, like, the other day, I live in Shillong. I sometimes go into the field, not as much as I used to, but I sometimes do that. Did you know that Meghalaya has been rated by the Central Grading CGI, I think, indicator, or the CGI, as having the worst education for school children, worst performer in education? I'm sure you didn't know that. Everybody thinks that many of the states are doing very well with education. Most of the states of the Northeast are in the second category, second lowest category. Only Sikkim is higher. And that tells you some of the real stories which don't get reported. If you read things, and journalists don't do these things anymore. If you look at things like CAG reports, you get lots of interesting stories. For instance, a couple of days ago, I wrote a column in the Telegraph. I read columns for a couple of papers, in which I read the CAG report on. There's been a lot of controversy about land being parceled out to corporates in protected areas, the 6th schedule areas. So I tried to explain what the 6th schedule was. And I also said that the CAG report for one state says that most of the councils have not even submitted their accounts for years on end, and nobody's asked them any questions. So these are the things we need to actually ask and write about, not just what is the news of the day or the moment.
Mr. Hazarika, that was a very interesting presentation. I've only visited Guwahati and Jorhat, and that was a long time ago, decades ago. A few years ago, there was a presentation here in the auditorium, and there was a young man from besides a Siang, dressed in his traditional dress. My question is, has there been any environmental impact assessment of the project that's to come up in that area within India? And a related thing based on questions that have been asked before this is, and what you said, the Ahoms are very proud of the fact that they came from Thailand many centuries ago. Why do they object to people coming in more recently?
Well, to answer the first question, so I'm sorry. Actually, there are big objections from the Adi community to the Siang project. The government has been trying to persuade them that this is in their interest. They have made many deals. They've had open hearings, but the public has and their leaders have been objecting significantly and consistently to this. So it's a bit of a standoff right now. And that's as of a few days ago. They've just passed. I think they passed a resolution saying that they won't allow it. No, there have been EIAs, but those are, what EIAs can, But there have been more serious discussions and attempts to negotiate beyond this EIA by political leaders saying that this is actually in our interest, we need to do this. Apart from ecology and economy, there's also strategic issues at stake, so on. But it's still being resisted. So I don't know how the dialogue will go. There is a conversation taking place, which is good. As far as the second part of the question is concerned, there's always been a concern in the region because largely it is made up, apart from the state of Assam, which is the largest, of smaller communities, of being, if not overwhelmed, of being not able to cope with influxes of various kinds. And I think that's a very, very deep-rooted concern and fear. Whether it's any more valid or not, I don't know. In several parts of the region, there are local elites who are powerful, affluent, and politically they control the show, as it were. So, and in places like Assam, where there has been considerable movement against immigration and so on, against immigration, this has been a concern since the, shall we say, even the 30s and 40s, particularly. So it's an old concern which hasn't been laid to rest. There are old fears which have not been resolved. As a result, new people face new prejudices. But let me put it in another way to you. If I come to Bangalore, I lived in Delhi for many years before shifting back to Shillong. I say that Delhi is like the ninth state of the Northeast. So many people from the region go there, settle there. So many have come here. They come for several purposes. At one time, it was for study and employment. Now it is for many things. People are doing startups here. They married here, or they marry and bring their families here. So this is a very interesting development over the past 20 years. I think there's somebody from APU here. Hi. How many teachers, professors would you have had in Bangalore from the Northeast teaching? Today, there are hundreds of them across the country. So the narrative is changing in a different way. I agree, we need to be more open, more welcoming, and so on. But there are these very vital concerns. In fact, in 1946, the Congress Party fought an election on the basis of resisting immigration. So the narrative has never died. It will never go away because it is still a very live issue. If you look at the region, it's a pretty small area in terms of numbers and people. We need to do more. I mean, the people ourselves, we need to do much more in terms of ensuring that we don't discriminate, and that we are welcoming, and so on. Because if you want to go ahead, you need to work with everybody. But there are these concerns which need to be addressed continuously. And it doesn't help that some people come and stir the pot from time to time, and saying that this is not an issue. These are issues which need to be or of concern for the Assamese and for other groups in the region.
Hi, sir. This is Asif here. I was born and raised in Shillong, and I studied from not far from your college. I studied from St. Anthony's. I think you studied from Edmonds. So my question is, it's towards Battle of Saraighat, right? We all know that Lachit Borphukan was the hero of that, and we all see his statues all over Assam and Northeast. But we are not taught that there was a commander called Bagh Hazarika, who was a Muslim man, who slipped inside the camp of Mughal before the battle and disabled the cannons. And the Mughals were led by a Rajput. Now the oversimplification of this entire thing is like Hindu-Muslim thing, right? And now in recent times it is even more. So what is your say about it?
I think we need to celebrate all people who played the part. I know Bagh Hazarika, one of his family members, I know, descendants. So everybody who played a part has to be celebrated, valued, and appreciated, not on the basis of what they are, but because of what they did and what they continue to do. That's always been my view. And I think the narrative always needs to be challenged and changed. That has to happen.
Thank you, Sanjoy, for that beautiful journey. It took me back nostalgically because I've grown up there. My question is, there was this policy about the inland water transportation on the Brahmaputra, which was going to be, one of the ways of communications in a big way. How far has that progressed, really?
Well, for the Brahmaputra to become what they call an international waterway, you must go international, no? We don't have any trade with Bangladesh now. We have virtually closed the borders, or whoever's closed the borders. The borders are not open in terms of travel. So how much material can you transfer from one point of Assam to the other? And there was one shipload which came, I think, 2 years ago from Benares, I think it was somewhere in UP. He went to Patna, then came through Bangladesh into Assam. I think that was the only ship that came that way, unless this becomes a regular basis. And that's how, the rivers don't recognize borders. And we need to understand that if you're going to have an economic waterway, economically viable waterway, then you have to have good relations with your neighbors. You can't change your neighbor, like you can change spouses and girlfriends and all that. Neighbors. Yeah, you can. Unlike changing your spouse, you can't change your neighbor, whether he's in he's next to here or he's in somewhere else, another country. So I think it just calls for better understanding of each other, better dialogue. Really, that's really the key conversation.